I didn't. I took a really great nap. My dog Bailey took a nap. She's here too. Oh, hi Bailey. What do you think of zombies? Do you love being on camera? Love being on camera. Thank you for your participation. So we took a really great nap. And we're ready to get back into story time now. I'm going to do some more hydrating. I've heard that this fizz isn't good for your teeth, and honestly, every once in a while it gives me a migraine. But it's really nice to sip on something fizzy, and even if this is still too acidic for my teeth, I feel like at least it's not the sugar and the acid. So we're just not going to tell my dentist about it, okay? We're not going to talk about how I have soft enamel. We're just going to enjoy the hipster beverage. This actually, LaCroix, used to be from my hometown. It started in my hometown. I grew up with this stuff in my coolers in a very different 80s, 90s can, not this can. So this used to be local, and I've known about it since I was tiny in my hometown. I think now it's out of California, but I'm not going to justify my accidentally hipster choices to you. I should be too cool to even think about it. It should be so not cool that I'm not going to justify it. Which is really more fitting in life. Story time. Ophelia Immune. I can't give you a sip of my hibiscus sparkling water. I can't give you a dog who loves to be on camera. I can give you story time with Ophelia, who has had some hard knocks recently. She's become infected, but she can still think. She's not a regular zombie. And she and her little sister, Juliet, who has turned into a regular zombie, are now in the city. They've left the small town of Nasmith, countryside, for the big city of Turrington. And this chapter is called The Clinic. It was difficult, keeping things that were safe to gnaw between Juliet's jaws. She went through all of the toys I could snatch out of already picked over dumpsters too quickly. Excuse me. LaCroix. Too close to our new building, I could twist rag dolls. Close to our new building, I could twist rag dolls out of shredded bag handles and could roll frozen corn cobs across our floor, but they didn't last more than an afternoon each. And I had to keep finding material to burn, starting fires to keep our veins pliable, wrapping her in soft tethers that wouldn't rupture her thin skin, trying not to raise a hand against her. No matter how often she chewed on my shirts, or knocked over chairs, or banged on the floor loudly. Are you comfortable? Those are the sounds that Juliet makes, that Bailey is making right now. So just use your imagination, and that's a little zombie rustling next to me. I'm a big yellow dog. And I had to keep finding material to burn, starting fires to keep our veins pliable, wrapping her in soft tethers that wouldn't rupture her thin skin, trying not to raise a hand against her. No matter how often she chewed on my shirts or knocked over chairs or banged on the floor loudly. No matter how often a swirling funnel of debris came whipping around a corner and plastered me against a grungy concrete wall in a terrible neighborhood. I kept rummaging and thieving to keep us in good shape. The wind was worse in the city than it had been in the woods, maybe because Turrington is on a river. The river was in a faraway part of the city. It took almost an hour for me to walk there from our apartment, but the dumpsters were less picked over there, and there were fewer humans to see me. Because nobody else wanted to walk there. Nobody wanted to be near the water or the fish, even when those were frozen. Our apartment was in a neighborhood closer to the highway and the markets, far from the rotten, ruined river. But if the nice people saw me, that would be it. Only the worst of the squatters lived near the river. The old men with no legs, or one leg stump that itched and peeled and never stopped scratching. The fat men who shouldn't be fat because nobody has enough food to stay more than skinny. What were they eating to stay so roly-poly? Maybe the old men with the leg stumps. Or maybe the skinny, naked little girls that they sometimes dragged around behind them. They might as well have used a leash to pull those girls along. And sometimes they did, their feet stumbling and cold as they disappeared into the squatter buildings. When their cries bounced off of my ears, it was hard not to go to them, to cup their faces like I would Juliet's, and send their owners flying out of their rooms and back into the obscene night. The buildings near the river were all missing parts of walls, and the air reeked of the lingering plastics and waxy scraps that the vile men burned to stay warm. The factory buildings near the old wharf on the river stank like the propane that they manufactured and pumped into used and dented canisters. Sometimes a dangerously aged canister would explode and fly out of the factory yard through the walls of the dilapidated squatter buildings. The fat old men raced to the site of the explosion to see if there was anything that they could use or steal from the charred villain that it had crushed. The ragged men with leg stumps hobbled on after the fat men to make sure they hadn't missed anything when they crept away from the carrion. Nobody sat in the old wharf's park. The concrete slabs where the old benches had anchored were empty, long robbed of their burnable furniture. A few humans muddled through the frozen, crispy grass on their way to bribe rope factory workers for the broken and short leftovers that their bosses would be happy to try and sell if they hadn't been pilfered. The factory workers counted their filthy money, kissed it, shoved it into their pockets, and scuttled back inside to ruin their cracked and bare fingers with more twining and braiding. Those who didn't have enough money to buy rope scraps huddled around cooking barrels in crowded corners, sharing flammable scraps and bartering for mitten shards or tin mugs full of weak broth. Those who had enough money to buy proper rope from the hardware stores and to pay rent and to buy cans full of food didn't come out after dark after all. They let the night to those of us who needed to move around without being seen. They didn't want to notice the girls being pulled on leashes and the scrambling for rope scraps and the bare pigeon bones. The rich slept in their tall buildings with real doors and fortified lower floors, while I trudged about, drinking water and rubbing my fingers together to stay warm and pliable. The rich slept until they heard me breaking their 6th-floor windows and climbing in, after I got sick of scrambling with the river scum. They thought about fighting me off, but when they heard me moan and rattle, they hid and shivered behind their bedroom doors, thinking that I would bite them instead of steal their firewood and fuel. I didn't laugh at their foolish fear of one little zombie. My chortles would have given me away before I could escape back to my apartment with the loot. But any healthy human could have just copied my strategy and made out like a bandit without even being sick. I never saw the rich people. I hid during the day. They hid from me when I moaned in their broken windows. And it was only us desperates out after dark. Us and the zombies, to whom I showed no pity. They were easy targets, so easy, and maybe the good I could do by killing them would make up for all of the bad I was doing. The zombies that I killed were always near warm spots. Vents, grates, open doors, or their own heated homes. There was a whole ex-family of 6 trying to break out of their sealed apartment while I robbed them of their movement and took all of their heating oil too. They didn't need it anymore. I left them piled near their family bed as a mercy and slipped away into the night with their blankets wrapped around the outfits and toys that I was carrying home to Juliet. She went through these things so quickly. I found 3 zombies in our own building without even going up to the 3rd floor. I never went above the 2nd floor, ever. Not where my human neighbors could see me. I just took the 3 ex-squatters who had turned after hunkering together in our hallway, dragged them down the stairs by their collars, out into the alleyway, and held them over the dumpster while I spilled their biology into the rubbish. They deserved it for not taking care of themselves. I kept my axe polished and sharpened against the solid black brimstone edge of one building's exposed cornerstones, about a mile from our own place. One night, I looked up above the thick foundation block that I was rubbing and noticed a big white square with a bright red cross. Before Dad had failed to take care of me, before I had failed to take care of everyone, when we were back in the car, he used to point to the red crosses on our maps and say that a different kind of engineers were inside. Doctors and scientists, working to save us all. That had probably all been hogwash, but I wondered if they could save me right then by leaving their propane unattended. Down the doctor's alleyway, there were some newly delivered boxes sitting behind the receiving door. It was dim enough for me to approach them without being seen. I hoped that the fresh, unopened boxes would be holding gas canisters wrapped in canvas sacks with bows made of matches and lighters. Or maybe recycled cardboard logs. One rich family that I had robbed had given us a few of those. They had smoldered for 2 whole nights in a row. Glancing over my shoulder for the doctors who would be collecting their delivery, I ripped open the boxes. They were full of empty receptacles, syringes, vials, test tubes, petri dishes, science supplies, doctor's tools, the other engineers. I looked around. Nobody was watching. I held a knot of my dirty hair out of my face and reached deeper into the box. I held a piece of smooth, clean glass tubing in my palm. Scientists used these on humans to collect their blood and to do the science that Dad had talked about. I wondered how my blood would look inside of it. Black and greasy, slimy, slick. I wondered if the engineers inside, the doctors and scientists, could use it for something. An experiment, maybe. I wondered if they would scream if they saw it mixed with their supplies. Or if they would be dumb, touch the zombie blood and get infected. Or if they would be smart and use it for something good. They could use it, test it, do science. I could be useful. Or just disgusting. I rolled up one of my sleeves, took a long, opaque vial, and held it under my arm. Black blood welled up as soon as I cut my skin with the corner of my axe. It tingled and seeped. It looked like I was injured and bleeding to death, but it didn't hurt, and I didn't get lightheaded. I was happy to give something away, something that I could give instead of take. Get rid of some of my own weight. The black goo dripped down my elbow and into the little plastic vial. The stopper squished back on top, and the vial clattered back into its holder. I resealed the box and stepped away, admiring the container of liquid onyx that I had left behind. It would probably be helpful for the scientists and doctors to have the blood of somebody who was infected and immune. I hummed with speculation as I rolled down my flannel sleeves. I came back the next night and did it again. I ripped open the boxes and then my arm. I dripped my slippery, sludgy blood into another large, opaque vial and moaned with joy as I walked away. I was lighter. I was giving somebody something. I had dirty blood to give. I couldn't give anything else, but my filthy blood I could give again and again and again. I could kill zombies, and I could vandalize scientists' boxes with my midnight stains, making them furious or curious. I'm not sure which. I can't tell. Maybe I would meet somebody else like me who was doing the same thing. It was a good idea. I watched over the clinic for an indication. Every night after I donated my sample, a doctor with shimmering auburn lion hair would open the service door and reach his arms out for the delivery boxes. One by one, he dragged the boxes inside until he got to the ones that I had ripped open to find the vials. Then he would stop and look for me, searching for the vandal. He never saw me in the shadows, but I saw him. He began sitting on the delivered boxes early in the evening, protecting them from me. He didn't just take them inside. He could have. He could have simply pulled them inside as soon as they were delivered. It would have been easier. But this doctor just sat and sat on the boxes, keeping me from making my donations. Maybe he was looking for revenge, or information to give the rangers about the criminal who was ruining their boxes. He was on the lookout to nab me. Probably he also didn't want to go back to work. He would rather sit on those boxes than go inside and do the important science. I was too full while he guarded the boxes, brimming and sloshing with infected blood that I should have been donating, being helpful, getting rid of. Instead, it was just sitting inside of me like he was sitting and not helping the other scientists who were inside working. I wondered if he was one of the scientists that was supposed to be working on getting humans back to the moon. I heard about the moon on the radio. One of the deafest squatters in our building blared a science program through the walls before his batteries ran out and he died of something that made him slow and smelly and yellow as he walked down the stairs, and I peeked out through a crack in the door. His radio programs had said that scientists used to know how to get to the moon, but when the zombies came, they were so busy trying to save us all that they forgot all about the moon. Didn't seem like we needed rockets up on the moon. But then maybe we zombies couldn't live up on the moon, and that was the whole point. We were never going to get back to the moon if this doctor was the one responsible for building rockets. He sat and sat and sat on the boxes for hours every night for a week. I'm doing terrible things to the spine of this book. You have permission to do the same. I love it when we get a glimpse of Ophelia's face. The cover was designed by my friend Alexei Kodolevsky, by the way, an amazing artist who also made this font that has this little axe going across in the end. We were never going to get back to the moon if this doctor was the one responsible for building the rockets. He sat and sat and sat on the box for hours every night for a week, wasting everyone's time. He jumped and stirred and shook every time he heard moaning or screaming coming from another street or alleyway, but never enough to get up and go inside. He just sat there in his lab coat, being terrified and leaving me too full of my own blood. Until finally, one night, a second scientist came out of the building wearing blue coveralls. They pointed and gestured together to the wall above the clinic. They took out a toolbox and installed an electric security camera. They made sure that its knobby blinking head was working and rotating. They waved their hands in front of it. They scribbled on each other's clipboards and went inside, leaving the boxes behind. Why didn't they just take their boxes inside as soon as they were delivered? I marched up to the security camera. It was much easier to crush than a skull. Its lenses popped and sprayed on my face as they broke. I smiled and ripped open the boxes until I found the large files that I liked. I wasn't scared of the small ones that required a needle. They probably wouldn't even tingle. But I didn't think that my blood was moving through my veins anymore. It was only marinating all of my organs. That's what it felt like as they rolled from side to side under my skin. I smashed 2 little electric spying machines before they stopped repairing them. Then they left a big white paper taped over the box with red tape and big black squiggles all over. They ripped as easily as worn-out burlap and blew away in the violent river winds. As soon as they were gone, I regretted not keeping them for kindling. I pulled my collar higher. It didn't reach high enough, barely up to my chin. My scarves and hats and turtlenecks couldn't cover everything, and winter attacked more of me as I rolled up my sleeves to fill the hungry cylinders. "Thank you," a voice said from behind me. I spun around. The doctor in the white lab coat stepped out of the shadows. My liver rose up into my throat. I enacted my best emergency plan. I made my gait awkward and stumbled towards him, moaning, so that he would run and retreat. I made sure that the low lights of the clinic door caught the green tint of my skin. He wrinkled his pale face in disbelief and didn't run away. "Nah," he said. "The scientists inside have been working with your blood. I know you're immune. You're not a regular zombie, I think." I reached for my axe and held it tight. "Whoa," he said. "I just want to talk." He put his hands up and took a step closer. He shook his flouncy nutmeg hair. He was younger and taller than I had thought. I'd have to jump to reach his head if I needed to. I was glad that he was testing my blood, but if he wanted to take me inside the clinic to become only experiments and not Juliet's caretaker, he'd have to fight to drag me inside. I glanced nervously at the heavy receiving door behind me. "Why didn't you just open the box labeled large vials?" he asked. "How quickly do your cuts heal? Do you feel aggressive?" I walked past him, shoving him against the brick with one hand. "Are you cold?" he asked. I paused, glanced over my shoulder. He was holding a propane canister out to me. I squeezed my axe, and I went back for it. I grabbed it and shook it gruffly. It was full. A free, full propane canister. "Thanks," I gurgled out of old polite habit. I began walking more briskly away. "You can talk," he said. "The virus didn't destroy your vocal cords." I ran away. He called after me. "I told them they should try testing the blood you've been leaving. I thought you might be immune. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for finding us." He wasn't there when I peered around the corner the next 2 nights, nor was there any more propane. But I left him more blood, hoping that he would keep testing it, hoping that he would leave me some more warm things, give me more propane for the blood that I needed to get rid of. I hoped that I could catch him, pick up my blood, and take it inside for testing. Real science. They were using my blood. I was helpful and not just a roving thief who couldn't save the girls being dragged behind the big, fat, one-legged men. On the 3rd night after the doctor told me I was useful, there wasn't a box of vials for me to use. I checked all of the boxes. I opened them up and dumped their contents. No large ones, no small ones, no vials, no needles even. Only cotton balls. I sighed, rubbed my gloved hands together, and repacked the 6 boxes that I had torn open. I turned to leave. "You can't read, can you? In any language?" he asked, coming from behind the dumpster. I gritted my teeth, reached for my axe. He held out a thermos. He unscrewed the lid. It steamed, white heat billowing into the freezing air. He set it down on the ground and backed away from it. "Do you know how to read?" he asked me again. "Read?" I gurgled, mostly to myself, reaching for the thermos. I took a sip. It was water. Warm water. He knew that zombies drank and that we were cold. I turned to leave with the hot fluid. "You can't read," he frowned. "I like coffee," I told him, the words sticking in my throat. His eyes widened. And there it was, my first full sentence to a real live human being in 6 months. I had spoken to the doctor who took my blood. I was getting chilled with less liquid between my ribs. I had given him some of my warmth, another piece of me. I needed to get back to my closet. I turned to go. "Goodbye," I said, enjoying my garble as it wafted through the air. He smiled. He held out another gift. A book. I frowned. What was it for? Maybe it was a map or kindling. I took it and eyed him suspiciously. I turned to leave, rolling the sludge about in my throat before I could move my feet. My scratchy cords threw more words out at him. "Does my blood really help with science?" "Yeah," he said. "I have heard that there were humans who were immune to the virus, but most of them are impaired, frozen, or violent." I poked at him with my eyes. "So there are more like me?" "Somewhere, I guess. I've heard of them, but you are the only one that I know of. Will you keep coming back here?" I nodded, took a few more steps. "You could come in," he offered, "where it's warm, and we could run more tests." I jumped. No way. Giving them small poisonous gifts was one thing, but trusting them was a whole nother. I'd never go in there inside the big clinic with the huge banging doors where they wanted to put all of me, every last drop, inside of a clear glass vial where I couldn't look out for Juliet. I took fast steps away from him. He raised his arm to say something more. I panicked. I ran all the way away. When I got home, Juliet was rubbing her face on the curtains. She turned around when I came in, arms outstretched. She moaned for me. I hugged her and let her chew on my jacket, but she lost interest in it when I took it off and it fell still and silent on the floor. Okay, Bean. We can wrestle later. I love you too. I tethered her to the refrigerator with a rope that had pink ribbon at the end. I sat down at the dusty dining room table with a cup of hot water and I lit a stolen candle. I licked my lips. Jumping shadows lurched and stumbled across the pages of my new gift. I would thoroughly examine the kindling before I burned it. The book from the doctor was not a map. It was a lot of pictures inside of a flimsy, bright yellow cover. There were pictures of buildings and towers and gardens. There were boats the size of houses and cities built over water. People. So many people. I could see their faces and the sun that warmed them. A droplet ran down my lips and chin, landing with a small splash on the pages. I brushed it off with my sleeve and closed my drooping jaw. There were pictures of deserts and oceans and animals with spots. There were animals with long noses, with long legs, with no legs, hanging by their tails. There were trees with curly branches and trees with green snakes of leaves running all down their sides. There were real snakes, too. There were machines I had never seen before. There were people, old men leaning on walking sticks, babies suckling, children playing a game with a ball in their feet. They were eating and dancing and working on clearing trails. They had knives as big as my axe. They had farms even smaller than ours had been, with beans all tangled around the pumpkins and red ripe fruit. My mom had grown squash like that. Dad had called us beans. Hector had smashed pumpkins with his purple clenched fists. The best picture was a woman who could have been family. She was young and brown, almost the exact same age and color as me. 17 and the same color I used to be. Except her eyes were a little more golden. They glistened. She was wearing a quilted jacket. It hung open against her bare chest while she bent over the dirt, smiling up at the camera. In her left hand was a neon melon, fat with seeds and dripping in her warm air. In her right hand, a knife, gripped tightly under her knuckles, glinting in the dappled light. I touched her face with my fingers until it was morning. The glossy paper didn't smudge. See, Juliet? I pointed for my tethered sister. This is what our home used to look like. We didn't have jungles, but we had vegetables. And we didn't used to be green. We used to look like her. We could eat fruit with knives and carry them back to our house like this. And eat with our family like these people are doing. Before they wanted to kill us. Before we were already dead. Her shoes squeaked against the linoleum as she strained against her leash, claws reaching to rip my new pages if she could get them. They didn't kill us, though. They missed. They didn't notice that I was immune. They let us leave to wander alone forever. I whispered, stroking the images of a small boy cutting a path between vines and swarming flowers. A piece of paper fell out of the back of the soft, slippery book. It tumbled out of the spine, folded in half in bright white against the moldy boards. I opened it with my dirt-packed fingernails. There were a series of squiggles on the left and a series of pictures of medical supplies on the right. Between each squiggle and each medical supply was a line. I stared at them until I had memorized the pairs. Which squiggles matched which supply. And then I looked through my new sunshine yellow book again, stopping at the paper of squiggles at the end. I smoothed the shiny pictures, memorized the squiggles, touched the faces of humans, learned the lines for the medical supplies. I explored the forests of faraway people, concentrated on the shapes that meant petri dish. This was reading. At sunset, I gently wiped my finger and nose prints from the glimmering pages of my new floppy book. I put it up on top of the refrigerator where Juliet couldn't reach it. I was glad that I hadn't used it as kindling, but there was also nothing else new to burn. All that was left in the apartment was our furniture. The furniture was necessary to block the door, to sit on once in a while. I loved having furniture, and we needed our clothes, we needed our blankets, we needed our floorboards. Burning Juliet's rope and ribbon leash was out of the question, but a wooden spoon from the kitchen drawers might do. It smoldered under the water pot until the water was almost lukewarm. I set a bowlful on the floor for Juliet. She drank it heartily. I wiped the cold drops from her chin and promised to find her something warmer soon. The steam grates outside the clinic were churning hot plumes into the night while the scientists inside were busy doing experiments on my blood. If I could help them out, if I could be good for science, maybe they could go to my family for me as a trade. They could explain to my family that they hadn't shamefully abandoned their daughters to wander alone forever. They could tell them that I was different, that I was immune, that it was okay that they hadn't killed me because I was different and I didn't need killing. That if I stumbled towards them, I just needed warm water and hot fire, not a crowbar to the brain. A true zombie, slow and staggering with chill. Not helping the scientists like I was, not taking care of anyone or anything, pawed and clawed at the clinic's grate, where the steam from their fancy electric machines pumped out into the night. The beast didn't notice me. It just grabbed for the clouds that it felt moving across its face. It was missing all of its fingernails, and the metal slats were smeared with its black glue. The clinic only used 3 floors of the tall building that it was inside of. The other 15 floors above were empty, void of all useful things. Only squatters were up there. One of them had turned and stumbled out of its window, down to the alley. It was only wearing a bathrobe, open, flapping in the steam, little drops of water condensed on its slick gray-green breastbone. I held my hand up next to its head. Warm steam condensed on my gray-green palm as well. When the monster turned its head to bite me, I drove my fist into the nape of its neck and smashed its skull against the grate, pushing again and again until I felt brick through its face and it stopped moving. I stepped back to let it fall. My hand was dripping. The scientist gulped loudly from behind me. He was staring at me. He gulped again. His eyes were huge, the size of trash can lids. He staggered and panted. He reached out to lean against the clinic door. He cowered from me. I hid my fist behind my back, relaxed my shoulders, wiping my hand on the back of my jacket until it was clean. I tried to clear my throat. It rattled. The scientist's pants quivered around his legs. I showed him both of my hands, as clean as they ever were, trying not to look dangerous. I took 3 slow, clumsy steps to the boxes of supplies and slowed down, to show him that I was calm and not too murderous. I used my lungs and tried to focus my eyes. I looked for the squiggles that he had written down for me and that I had memorized. I had hoped that I memorized them rightly. I wanted to demonstrate that I had not used the book for kindling. I found the squiggles that had been paired with the drawing of the large vials, and I plunged my hand into the box. I pulled one out and triumphantly spliced my arm open, running some of my black goo into the container, sealing it, wiping the drips onto my sleeve, and setting it back into its holder. I patted it securely into place and smiled lopsidedly at him. He gripped the solid dumpster that stood between us. A thermos caught my eye, set carefully on top of one of the other boxes. The squiggles on the box said that there should be gauze pads inside. I perched on top of the gauze pads and opened the thermos, smiling a hopeful thank you to him. I noticed its smell. It was not water. It was coffee. I took a sip. It was so hot that my tongue tingled against my teeth. Amazing. My nostrils told me that the beans had probably been very recently roasted in a nice big drum, cooled evenly, stored in the dark, ground in a burr grinder, and brewed at about 210 degrees, perfectly, inside of the fancy clinic. Maybe grown in Java. Dad had told me about Java. I wondered if any of the pictures in the book had been from Java. I only knew how to find it on a map. I remembered that Dad had traded for coffee from Java once. I swallowed a rich mouthful, closing my eyes and imagining the lush forest where the beans had been grown. I jumped when I remembered that it was not the big green coffee leaves that were rustling. It was the scientist shuffling his feet. I panicked and opened my eyes to stare at him while I drank. He eyed me now, too. "We're quite the pair, as my mom used to say," I mumbled. "Do you know if anybody else in your family is immune?" he asked. "Has your mother, grandmother, a sister, a cousin, or anybody been infected and retained any cognitive abilities? Probably the females." "Nope," I said. "Nope, none of them are immune. Not unless my big sister was immune, and they took care of her before we could find out. Isn't that a shame? Or is that best? Do I wish that she had been immune, or that I had walked off with her when I had the chance? Or that my dad killed me as rightly as her? But there are more like me? Can you tell me if there are more like me?" "I'm sorry. I don't know any. Sorry." I was sorry too. Even the human, the scientist, didn't know of more like me. To tell my family about, to give them an example. Of what? Maybe there wasn't anybody else I could live, steal, and talk with ever again. Maybe I didn't need them. Maybe they were violent or impaired, like he said. Maybe Juliet was enough. Maybe we should all be dead. Maybe I could just talk to the scientist. I rolled the coffee around in my mouth. It gurgled as I swallowed. Well, maybe my mom. She could be immune. Haven't seen her in a while. Maybe she died and she is immune. I wondered if Mom was dead. I wondered if she let Dad kill Imogen before she had time to show us that she was immune too, like me. I wondered what day of the year it was, if I'd completely forgotten when Imogen's birthday was. How old am I? Am I 17 yet? No. Wait, not till summer. Not till summer. I couldn't remember when Mom or Dad's birthdays were. If I wasn't so angry that they had let me alone in the world instead of killing me or keeping me like they should have, one way or the other, just pick one, I would send Hector a package for his birthday. When was his birthday? If I could go into a post office and put stamps on the presents that I stole for them, maybe they could get into trouble for receiving a package of stolen goods. I smirked into my coffee and wondered what they were all doing right now, if they were still breathing, if the post office was running regularly, if the snow permitted the letter sleigh to make deliveries as scheduled once per month. I doubted that there were any zombies at the farm right now because there were no apartment buildings for any to tumble out of. They'd all be frozen. I wondered if Juliet was busy sledding up and down the hills above the stream. My mom wasn't immune, the scientist mumbled sadly. I shook my head and remembered that Juliet was dead and tied to a broken refrigerator in my squatter's kitchen. My mom locked me out of the house after she was bitten, he said. She went outside. After a while, she pounded on the windows to get back in, until the neighbors saw and came to get me. I lived with my great aunt after that, in a high-rise. Everybody else in our family was dead, but she was safe because she stayed up in her condo. Until I got this job, I stayed up there too. Not many zombies up in a condo. I never met a zombie, besides my mom, besides you. You've never dealt with zombies at all. I stood and paced. That's not safe. That's not right. You should learn about them, to take care of them. You should have learned a long time ago. It's a miracle that you're even alive. I leaned over the truly dead, bathrobed zombie that I had splattered with my fist. I put my foot on its chest. The scientist followed at a distance. First, I showed him, we need to separate the pieces of the body so that they are easy to lift. You have to get the axe point between the bones of the joint and sever the tendons and ligaments. if you don't want to hack through the bone. The scientist covered his mouth with his hand and made it to the trash can before he vomited. I chopped the course into pieces while I waited for him to wipe off his frothy, acidic mouth. He came back when he was finished, not speaking. Now, we lift the torso into the dumpster, I instructed. He bent down to grab soaked fabric near the bare pelvis sockets. No, what are you doing? Are you going to grab the bloody parts with your bare skin? Good way to find out if you're immune. Never, ever touch an infected body on purpose. He went limp with shame and stared down at his brown leather loafers. I sighed and slowed down. I pointed to the terry cloth scraps that were dry. Use the cleaner parts of the bathrobe. I grabbed the collar, and the scientist jammed his hands into the ex-robe's pockets. On the count of 3. We swung the torso up and into the dumpster to be collected with the rest of the body parts. Hey, not bad for your first time. Don't worry, you'll learn. The high-rise won't be a disadvantage forever, I encouraged him. I wiped my hands in my pants, stuck it out for him, free of black goo. I'm Ophelia. He wiped his hand on his lab coat. I had never seen hair so shiny and smooth as the tiny locks curling over the band of his silver watch. His white coat wasn't thick enough for a winter coat, but he looked warm anyway. His pink cheeks were flushed. Short waves of heat radiated around his neck. He thought about shaking my hand, but he shook his head at the idea of touching my skin. I let my arm fall. He was right. I could infect him. He was human, warm, breakable. I could hurt him just as much as the corpse we had just chopped. What was I thinking? Always the wrong ways of taking care. I'm Jim, he said. Jim? Well, James, really. It's nice to meet you, Jim. It's nice to meet you, Ophelia. Will you keep coming back here? We could really use your blood for more experiments. Actually, my job kind of depends on it. Screams echoed from a few blocks away. My throat rattled. I looked up in the direction that my ears told me a zombie was chasing someone. The screams continued, loud and long, shaky. I could take care of that. Jim looked up at the noise too, but he had no idea what to do about it. He could do nothing. He had grown up in a high-rise with books and a great aunt who had no axe. He didn't know what to do about a zombie chasing someone, but I did. I knew how to kill a zombie. I could walk right up to the zombie, turn it around to face me, knock it upright, and put it to its rest. The screamer could walk away. I could donate my blood to science, and I could kill zombies. Those were things that I could take care of. Yeah, I said. I'll be back. And there we have it. Ophelia has discovered a clinic with a scientist, and she's getting rid of some of her zombie blood to help with science. Capital S. What will happen next? See you in next story time.